Survey says European derivative market participants ready themselves for future clearing mandates. Welcome to Numerix video blog. I'm your host, Jim Jockel. Joining me today is Udi Sella, FX expert and head of the Product Client Solutions Group for EMEA. Udi, welcome.
Thank you.
So we're going to start with a nice quote from Ben Franklin, one of the founding fathers here in the U.S. It says, by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. And today we're talking about a new survey published by Deutsche Risk, that's on risk.net, that states over one-fifth of respondents to the survey, which includes banks, asset managers, hedge funds, insurance companies, non-financial corporates, are planning for new rules to change their business operations, while almost two-thirds state that clearing will increase their cost of doing derivative trades by almost 5%. Is this in line exactly with what you're hearing in the market? And what do you expect the trend in terms of bespoke over-the-counter derivative products being utilized as they are today for hedging, or even the impact on standardized future products?
So that's a long question. I think in general, I think that mostly there's uncertainty, and people still need to understand, or people are contemplating what is needed, what is required from them in terms of preparation for the regulation. So that's one thing. And in general, when I look at the results of the survey, I don't think that the results are that alarming, and it doesn't seem, for now at least, that there are very significant changes of the landscape are to be expected. If in general about 22%, I believe, of the surveyed institutions mentioned that this will be this regulation will impact the way they are doing derivatives business. So that's not huge, and even of those 22%, only a portion would move to other contracts. So, for instance, you mentioned the futurization, which we discussed on a separate video blog. I think of those 22%, 34 said that they would use more listed products, and about perhaps 20% would use future contracts that mimic OTC products, which are, of course, much more flexible.
So one of the results, one could particularly argue, is more operational efficiency. If more elements are going centrally cleared, then there's less requirements internally for CSA management and things of that nature. Do you foresee a welcome change as it relates to adoption of new regulatory regimes?
So I think clearly regulation is the biggest driver. Now, when you trade derivatives, basically people look at few ways how to address that. So one thing to reduce capital charges is really moving to clear trades and to trade over swap execution facilities. And this basically the margin requirements for clear trades lower. So that's one way to benefit. The second, but if you still want to use the OTC market, as of course it offers much more flexibility in customizing your contracts, people are now applying more and more two different methodologies, again, to reduce risk, and then reduce counterparty risk, and then reduce the capital charges. So one is about working on the CSA terms, and basically trying to work it in a way that you can mitigate the risk while the trade still exists. And the second thing is basically when you take you take the trades and you try to actually offset them by finding the exact matching offsetting deal. So we see that happening too. And so these are the three ways. So I think too, if we follow this path, probably 20%, if we think this represents the market, and Germany is still, the number 4 economy in the world, there might be some reduction in the OTC derivatives, but not very significant.
Now, the survey itself is very wide in terms of surveying all market participants, and I think one important element is within the proposed IOSCO rules as it relates to margin, is there are exemptions for different end users based on size of thresholds and in terms of notional amounts within the portfolio. Do you think that potentially changed the skew of the survey as it relates to how many people are going to stay within their current OTC practices as compared to those perhaps just more sell-side institutions that do have large notional outstanding and exposures to over-derivative contracts that would feel a more direct hit towards their capital requirements.
Yes, I think this is a very reasonable approach to look at things because first of all, now they're talking about exempting, for instance, insurance companies from centralized clearing. So I think what basically the regulator is trying to do is that people that use derivatives as a hedging tool, as a tool to mitigate risks on your book, will be exempt because we don't want to increase, basically the cost of operations, and by requiring, more working capital, etc. And if we look at this, the economical cycle in Europe, for instance, where the survey was taken, the last thing that the decision makers want to do is to take out capital off the market and put it like in as buffers. As to banks, still there's still the activity is much more speculative, if you like, and I think this is where the regulator wants to put more boundaries and to make sure that taxpayers' money doesn't go against the same banks. So yeah, I think we'll see divergence between the buy side and the sell side, to answer your question.
So one of the questions that that just comes to mind is it relates to insurance companies. Right now, under Solvency II, a lot of European insurers are hitting different milestones as it relates to compliance, which oversees direct elements of their capital. But now with the rules as it relates to derivatives, here's yet another capital buffer. How are insurance companies faring with two overarching regulatory regimes that impact both sides of their business?
Yeah, so I think pretty much the answer is that the main regulation that they are subject to is really the Solvency II, and this is exactly the reason that, which of course is a very heavy regulation with huge demands on capital, etc. So I believe, I'd like to believe that if you like, the financial regulators, which don't come from the insurance side, pretty much rely on the Solvency II regulation that it will, create sufficient buffers. There's no need to apply additional security or safety valves to protect the insurance companies. And again, if you look at the economic cycle in Europe, we see that the financial results of insurance companies, it's not something that inspires taking up or adding additional cost to the operation.
Well, thank you so much, Udi. And if those interested in reading the survey on itself, it was Risk Magazine, Deutsche Risk Survey 2014, Regulatory Cost Drive Market Dynamics. It was published in September issue, authored by David Wiggin. Udi, thank you so much for joining us today. And of course, we want to hear everything that you want to talk about, so please follow us at NX Analytics on Twitter, as well as on our LinkedIn pages or on our blogs at Numerix.com. And we look forward to speaking with you soon. Thank you very much, Udi.
Thank you very much for having me.